CatSynth TV. Hey everybody, CatSynth TV, and I am very excited to have with me today Dina Pearlman-Ifil, the Executive Director of the Alan R. Pearlman Foundation. Of course, many of you might know Alan R. Pearlman as the man behind the ARP line of synthesizers that we all know and love, but there is a lot more to the story. So, Dina, welcome to CatSynth TV.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored. Thank you.
So, for those on the channel who are not necessarily familiar with the foundation, can you please tell us a little bit about it and its mission?
Sure. The foundation was started the year that my dad passed, which was 2019, and it happened organically. I woke up the day after my father had passed to find my Facebook plastered with all sorts of tributes and acknowledgments and condolences by people all over the world and people that I'd never met. It was a little startling, and soon I was barraged with requests for interview material and like that, because my mother was not really well versed in the internet and so on. So I recognized immediately that I needed to create some sort of separate and apart from me, a presence online, and that's the actual beginning. In the same time, I realized that quite often when people pass, it is suggested that they donate to some kind of organization in lieu of flowers or the like. And I suddenly was struck by the idea that there should be a scholarship in my father's name. My father was very interested in helping others in a mentor capacity, and I'm sure we'll hit on that a lot. And so I said, well, maybe we should create a scholarship. And so all these things were sort of coming at me all at once. And I created a board, mostly of friends and former coworkers of my father, and a few people that had met him in later years. And this was really initially to create a scholarship, the Alan R. Pearlman Scholarship. Well, we did not get our 501c3 until the last week of March 2020. And we all know what happened in March 2020. The whole world changed forever. And it was not a time to be doing fundraising for scholarships. It was a time to try to figure out what's going to happen next and how to survive the unexpected pandemic that had befallen us. So, as a result, the foundation took on a whole new shape of creating awareness about my father's legacy and trying to introduce to a whole new audience the history of ARP. Until that time, we were creating projects and ideas for projects and conferring with Berklee School of Music, Berklee College of Music. My father had done some collaborations and lectures at Berklee. Quite a few of the former ARP employees and associates actually went to work at Berklee, and they actually had a wonderful symposium, an ARP symposium in 2015 when he had turned 90. And so there was a very obvious simpatico between the ARP, the future Alan R. Pearlman Foundation, and Berklee. So until that point, we'd been focused on the scholarship. Though another serendipitous event happened in between, and that is Korg introduced the 2600, or reintroduced, I should say. I found out about it before the release, but it was very exciting. We were heading to NAMM to tell people about the foundation that we were working on, and all of a sudden, I am with the Korg development team accepting an award on my father's behalf for the reissue of the 2600, which got Best in Show. So all of a sudden, all this amazing, positive feedback started happening, and that really helped our foundation start to take hold. Since that time, we spent the first couple of years in lockdown creating symposiums, online symposiums about the 2500, the 2600, We interviewed many musicians, both famous, emerging, and everywhere in between, all ARP lovers. And we created a very strong online presence for my father, which previously had been limited to a couple of Wikipedia articles and, just sort of limited to very small mentions. A lot of people apparently did not know him. So I think we achieved our first goal pretty quickly of preserving the legacy of my dad. Now, the second part of our mission statement, which is on our website, is that we want to enable future generations to create. And that is a direct lineage from my father's propensity for mentorship. How can we mentor future generations? Well, I found out that it's hard to get a scholarship going unless you have a lot of money, but we were able to create a wonderful collection of instruments. And just this past early spring, actually, it was still winter, it was March, we had our first artist in residency and enabling a young emerging composer to come and spend a week with the synthesizers, all all access to everything, and then culminate with a performance and a recording, which we will be releasing shortly.
Yeah, really exciting.
It's very exciting.
With the artist in residence, and of course the art for all the instruments. I know I got to play a few of them at NAMM this year. Partly courtesy of our mutual friend Allison from Synthetic
Oh, yes.
Dreamscapes and her cat Gracie. Yeah, but I also understand that this year in particular is a very exciting year for you and the foundation, as it is Alan R. Pearlman's centennial.
Yes.
And you mentioned that 2015 was the 90th birthday, so 2025, we're at 100. And I think you have some interesting things to present around that.
Oh, yes. Yes, he would have been 100 this year. He had really hoped to live to be 100. Unfortunately, he made it to 90, almost 94, which is an accomplishment, I believe. My father always said that he was born at a very exciting time when it came to inventions and technology. He remembers the George Washington Bridge being finished, when he was just a little boy. And his father and his grandfather both worked in various aspects of film and movie projector technology. And he was absolutely blown away by the possibilities. So, what I wanted to do was to introduce him to the world as not just an inventor, but someone who was a futurist because he valued technology and its possibilities to enhance our future as a species, as the humankind, to preserve the planet, which is something he became obsessed with later, to explore other planets. He loved science fiction and uh, was involved sort of with the NASA program. We can talk about that as well, and 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 enhance the ability for all musicians to create sounds that were never made before. So I want to show him as a well-rounded person, not just the ARP synthesizer guy, but how he got there and how his dreams and his aspirations are things that are extremely important to all of us right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a wonderful and refreshing thing to hear the sort of optimism
Yes,
about technology and humanity, especially in this time that we find ourselves in.
yes,
To know
yes. He
that,
was an optimist. He was
yes,
he was very optimistic, and I remember speaking to him over the years when there would be challenging times in our history. And one of the things he always would say is, the pendulum is always swinging. There's always different directions that it's going in, and if it goes in one, it has to go in the other. So he's applying physics to politics or world stage situations, and his optimism was something that really was a balm to me. He was the guy who would always make me feel better if I was sad. He was that kind of dad, and So on a micro level, it was very helpful for me. Of course, on the macro level, he was very much a contributing factor to so much in this world that we have to be grateful for. The centennial year, we're planning on doing a number of initiatives. Our first event is going to be on June 7th at MEAP, which is right outside of Philly, the Electronic Education Preservation Project. And we're going to be having a symposium there. And they have probably, for those people who don't know, one of the largest synthesizer collections, I think, on the planet. Yeah, yeah. If you haven't seen it, you have to go. And I say that to anyone who is not just a music lover, not just a electronic music lover, but a music lover per se. They have speakers that belong to the Who. They have all sorts of crazy organs, and I mean, the Keith Emerson modular, and more than one of a lot of rarities, and they put so much love and energy into it. And we've been wanting to do a collaboration for a long time. We've done a few small ones, but this one will be both educational and fun. A couple of the details are getting nailed down, and we should have an announcement by May 1st. We are going to follow that with another event on the West Coast. So those of you on the West Coast who can't come out here, yes, it's going to be at the Museum of Making Music, the NAMM Museum in Carlsbad, so Southern California. And we're going to have an exhibit there. We're going to also have performance and also have a panel. And hopefully we'll have some programs during the year that, I know there's a lot of students at like USD and that study electronic music. So hopefully we'll be bringing some of the students in there to have some fun as well. If things go well, we hope to be in the UK. There was supposed to be two festivals. I know Synthfest UK, and then there is a museum that has a big collection of Korgs and ARPs. They have a room there, and we're going to be doing some lectures, and that should take us through most of the year. In between, we'll have some fun stuff. We're going to have the raffle. We are actually currently selling a signed Herbie Hancock Odyssey. It's not a vintage.
Wow.
So yeah, so we're not raffling it because it's not a vintage, but we have put it for sale, and I will give you the link for that if it's still for sale at the when this is being published. And we're going to have a compilation, a music compilation of multiple artists contributing pieces to uh, to celebrate my father. So it's very exciting. We're trying to kind of have a multi-pronged approach to celebrating.
So many exciting things
Yes.
coming there. All the symposia. I mean, obviously, Herbie Hancock is a musical hero of mine. Um, and these programs happening here on the West Coast, maybe back in New York, where I sometimes am too. Where can people find out more about all of these that are happening now, coming up, the raffle, how to support the foundation?
Sure. The easiest way is to subscribe to our newsletter, alanrpearlmanfoundation.org. And we have subscription forms all through social media, but also if you look up our website, there's a contact form specifically for subscription purposes. And we know that not everyone loves social media, so we want to try to start focusing a little bit more on our newsletter and not just solely on social media. But we also have an Instagram account. Um, ARP Synth, and the Alan R. Pearlman Foundation and Archives is our Facebook. So
We will have links to all of this that we've been talking about in the description below, so please do check that out. I'd actually like to sort of dive back into your father's history a little bit and some of the things even going way back, like you mentioned the building of the George Washington Bridge, which of course was a already built, icon growing up for me. Um, but I think also his interest in electronic music goes way back as well.
it
Maybe not
goes
to the
way back.
30s, but yeah, but certainly way
Well,
back, well beyond ARP.
I mean, we could say that it went to when he took apart a radio when he was 4, got, and put it back together again. Also getting zapped, getting an electric shock, and being mesmerized more by the power of it than the pain of it. So both of those two things were huge motivators. I found out later that his grandfather used to sing, and I thought that was just some weird habit that I picked up. But apparently, there's a genetic thing in the Perlmans to remember songs really well and to have to hum them or sing them all the time. He started taking piano lessons at a very young age, and he was definitely, both him and his brother Don were considered extraordinarily gifted in, especially in the intelligence IQ area. When he was taking piano lessons, he started to meet some interesting people. He was taking lessons by a Russian immigrant who ran around with a lot of intelligentsia. And to go back into sort of the context of it, during the Russian Revolution and the early part of the last century, a lot of people that left Russia left because if they were intellectuals, they were often considered enemies of the communist state. So he would sometimes hear or speak to some of these people, and some of them were physicists. And so he learned, I think in high school, started learning a little bit more about the physics of sound. So between having a big crush on his piano teacher, which kept him going with his piano, and then being mesmerized by all of these people that he was meeting, he really was so totally immersed in music and uh, technology at the same time. So his passion was music and also electronics. So those two things combined, when he went to college, he got he studied electronic engineering. Yeah. So that was his early start. He was kind of the shy geek in high school. That short, wore glasses, and was not necessarily adept at doing all the popular things, but he liked to run track, and he always had a very strong sense of self, I think, and that's really what gave him the confidence to go forth and invent.
Yeah, it's a man after my own heart with those interests and personality, certainly.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was an amazing time. He got to hear some of the famous composers. Was it Stravinsky, Rachmaninoff? So he was old enough that he got taken to concerts and to see. So he was exposed to wonderful classical music, both from the composers themselves as well. So it's really exciting. When he got to college, he was very interested in electronic music. He was interested in electronic music even back in college, and this is something that was a revelation, I think, for me to find this out. There was a newspaper article that I found when I went to visit his alma mater. This is about 3.5 years ago. And in this article, it talks about how he built a touch sensitive instrument. And it looks like he's playing a cello. He created some sort of touch sensitive fretboard. And he wrote an award winning paper that they talked about in 1948 in the Worcester newspaper. He went to Worcester Polytech. This is something that was a passion of his. It was his thesis statement um, on making sounds with vacuum tubes. One of the things he noticed about, there were limited electronic instruments back in those days. Tom Ray wrote a lot about them in his electronic perspectives articles, and it's very fascinating because I didn't know about a lot of these instruments, but these are the things that my dad was studying and he was really fascinated with. And he didn't feel that at the time they had a lot of options because there was no expressiveness. There was just an on and off, which is why he was so concerned about creating a touch sensitive instrument. Along the way, of course, I think at one point he had to leave college for a year. He was drafted. He did not go overseas, but he worked with radio technology in the Army. And then, ironically, right after he graduated, he started working in companies that had a lot of defense contracts. So that's how he eventually got into op amps. He worked for Raytheon, and Raytheon was making they had something to do with the NASA and Apollo and Gemini projects. So he was making amplifiers for NASA. Yeah,
That's really cool.
it's really cool.
Yeah,
It's really cool. I did a lot of deep dives about trying to learn a little bit more, but he worked for the company that really was the cutting edge of all op amps because he originally worked for George Philbrick, which is where they were realized. I know that there was a few people that were working in that direction that George Philbrick worked with, and then Philbrick started making the op amps, and they were getting into analog computing. And at some point, they decided he left Philbrick with another guy, this guy Roger Noble, and they created Nexus Research Labs, which focused solely on op amps.
Op amps naturally lead to oscillators and filters,
Mhm.
and I can imagine where this is going at this point.
Oh yeah, yeah. For people that don't know, op amps are sort of the components for most of electronics these days, or in those days, I should say, not these days. Um, and analog computing was heavily reliant on them. And a lot of people like analog computing. That seems sort of like an oxymoron. You think of computing, you think of digital, but there's been computers around for centuries. It's just not what we think of as a computer. It's not a device that you talk through, but it was to create calculations, or in this case, it was to be able to measure heat or instrument, to help instruments be accurate, to create a situation where there would not be uh, destabilization from temperature vacillations. Vacillations in temperature can absolutely ruin and confound a lot of electronic components. So, uh, stabilizing components was really what the name of the game, and of course that was a major part of what made ARP synthesizers such a valuable part of the lexicon of the early synthesizers.
Analog computing is actually something I've had a growing fascination with. Obviously, it wasn't in the forefront when I was growing up and learning about computers, but learned about it later, and its connection to solving differential equations and things like that. And there's even a analog computing module behind us,
Hmm.
between the
Ah.
Surge and that one that should have the little oscilloscope, but I didn't bother to turn it on. So yeah, it seems to have a natural connection to sort of the discipline of modular synthesis. And we see it with the analog computer, with the make noise math that's above my head, but you don't always hear about it so much. And so I'm curious, you know, if he made that part of, how he thought about music making with electronics. Was there a sort of a strong connection there?
Oh, well, absolutely, absolutely. Well, first of all, just going back, I'm not sure if it was Philbrick or Nexus. I'm pretty sure it was Nexus that created these analog computer modules. So there was actually, if you see them in a wall of synthesizers, they don't look that different. They really don't look that different. And they're meant to interact with each other, even though they're separate components. They're meant to interact and stabilize each other. There's pictures on the Philbrick archives of analog computers and modular analog computers. So the idea similar to modular synthesis is you would have a variety of modules that would have certain purposes. They each would have their own designated tasks, and you could um, put them together. So control voltage.
I was thinking back to my conversation a few weeks ago with Todd Barton, and how a lot of innovators had their way of thinking about electronic music making. Just sort of what the fundamental building blocks are, like how that relates to performance and practice. And we
Mm.
talked about, how he was very concerned with the ability to do expressivity in addition to just making notes with on and off. So, is there kind of an Alan R. Perlman approach to synthesis?
It's interesting because I think that he was for years a frustrated musical technologist. I think right after he graduated, he ended up going right into the workforce. And like I said, he worked for Raytheon, he worked for a number of companies that had national defense contracts, mostly because of that's the technology, because he was really using cutting edge technology. I mean, he used vacuum tubes in college, but then he started working with transistors, and then transistors led to op amps, and op amps led to um, you know kept going. So, integrated circuits, and so he'd always been working with electronic components. As a matter of fact, he even helped develop the Curtis chip, which is something I didn't know until
Oh,
I
wow.
spoke with Phil Scirocco recently. Phil Scirocco is a synthesizer restoration artist, I would call him. It's really artistry what he does. He made friends with my father very, very early in life. I think I'd gone to college and he had just finished college, and he came to Massachusetts and met my dad. And they had a lot of talks, and my dad gave him schematics, and they had a lot of discussions about that. So yeah, the idea of building a better mousetrap. When he started to hear people use electronic music, he got very excited. He got extremely excited by Mort Subotnick and by Wendy Carlos in equal measure. He was a classical music aficionado. So I don't know if you could see, this is the his Steinway here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. And so to actually hear classical music being done electronically to him was just imagination exploded. Is just incredible. And then the degrees of interesting sounds that was coming from Mort Subotnick's work, he found fascinating. And he was hanging around Harvard University at the time. He was taking some night courses. He had been out in California actually working, doing. I'm not sure exactly which company he was working for at the time. I think Raytheon, or but when he came back to Massachusetts, he got an apartment in Cambridge, and he took some courses at Harvard, and which is how he met my mom, by the way.
Mhm.
Um, that's a great story in itself. I'll get to that in a minute. But he was hanging around and meeting all these really interesting people, including Leon Kirshner, who was a composer as well, who, while not using synthesizers per se, was making electronic music using tapes. And Mort Subotnick was working with him. I think he was his assistant. So he actually met Mort back then, and met all these people doing amazing things at Harvard, and so that was really inspiring for him. See the painting behind me? That was painted by my uncle, who was an art professor at Harvard. And so he met my uncle first, and when my uncle found out that he knew how to fix televisions and radios, my dad was over all the time fixing all of his equipment. That's how we met my mom. So he
Wow.
was like, you know how, like, I'm everybody's computer tech person. They call me up and say, "Hey, Dina, how do I?" So, you know, he was everybody's TV repair guy.
Yes. I think one way to perhaps ground things here that brings together all of these different threads or cables, if you will, is the instrument, the ARP 2500, the amazing, the elusive. I still have yet to play, but I understand that the foundation has been able to assemble one. Um,
Well, it wasn't exactly assembled. What happened is that one of our supporters and friends of the foundation, who is a gentleman that used to work for ARP, had a 2500, what you would call a uh, concert cab, a concert unit, which is just an eight. They had eight racks. So, and I think there was only six modules in them at the time. And what he said was he used to save up for one, and then, and he, with his work discount, and then he would buy it. And then he realized that it had been many, many years since he played it. And he really understood how much we felt that that would complete our initial collection. He thought about it for a couple of years, I think, and then decided that he was going to donate it to us. And we wanted to get it sort of fully loaded, since of eight modules is not a lot to begin with. Six is even less. And so we did a fundraiser to raise the money for a Phil Scirocco uh, module. Actually, my mistake. There were seven, and Phil Scirocco's module was the eighth one in there. Um, and I felt very happy about that, because Phil used my father's schematics. He really revered my dad and is very faithful in his work, even though, of course, as my dad would have wanted it, taking it to the next level, which I think is important as well. And so we raised the money. We did a fundraiser, and we purchased a module, and then we had it put together. And he restored it. He moved them around to make more sense for our needs. And then we met in some lonely, remote place in the middle of nowhere, and took it from car to car. No, it was kind of like that, actually. Though we actually did end up. He was driving up from where he lives, and that's how we got it together. And I kept it at my home studio for a couple of months, just because I realized that's probably the only time I'll ever get to have it in the house. But also, I wanted to learn how to use it a little bit. And if you know anything about modular synthesis, the concept is not difficult at all. What the learning curve for someone who's used to something, more like a 2600 or a Moog modular, is that to create the patch points, you're using matrix switches. And so the closest analogy I can come to is the idea of an old fashioned map, which I realize most people that were born after 1980 have no idea what that is. But it's, but the idea of coordinates. So, and sort of understanding the idea of a matrix. I think there's is it Synthes that have
yeah, the
made,
EMS Synthie has the sort of
yeah.
battleship pegs that are on the coordinate. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the closest thing, because if you play with one, it's very deceiving. You think of it, you have sliders in your head, you're thinking Odyssey and all that. They don't slide, they click. So you're really moving stuff in there, and it is surprisingly durable. This stuff was made to last. This instrument is a very, very, very strong instrument, which brings me back to, now I remember what you asked me. Is there an ARP flavor, so to speak, maybe, if a I think the 2500 exemplifies that. So I think we can bring this full circle. When he was exploring synthesis in the mid 60s, when he started to hear what Don Buchla and Bob Moog were doing, and he got very excited after hearing, Mort and Wendy, he went down to Brown University. There was a music professor at the time named Shep Shapiro. Um, and he showed them the instruments that he had. And, my dad looked in and out and, probably unscrewed, I don't know, and looked around. And then he asked, what would you want if we were to create a new model, a new approach? What are the elements you think would be important for a musician? And he said, stable oscillators that don't go out of tune, and a different system than patch chords because they get really unwieldy. And the 2500 was his building the better mousetrap. It was trying to eradicate both the instability of oscillators that would be affected by temperature shifts, and to eliminate the potential need for patches and have things that were hardwired, so to speak, for lack of a better word. So that developed, of course, into the exponential temperature converter that enables the synthesizer to stay in tune. He used a higher voltage in his instruments, and it apparently it was a great formula. And that the idea of asking what a musician would want and trying to build a better mousetrap was really what he was aiming for, and what I think most of his synthesizers exude is enabling the user, the musician, to have an easy or easier time making sounds, making music, um, and being able to use it for performance as well as studio work and recording work. So the idea of being able to take something that would not have such a crazy variability depending on the temperature of the room, or how long it's been in a truck, or being transported or whatnot, also developed into the idea of visual ease of use. So of course people will say, well, we love sliders, or we love knobs, or we love both, but it became apparent to a lot of musicians that seeing the levels of sliders was an easy way to remember a patch. Much easier, because it's very hard to see the little notch marks in dials, and you don't see it as one entity. Think about going, moving up and down, like a, ADSR. You can remember the pattern very well. And it also lent itself for creating, patch books, diagrams, or whatnot. So ease of use for a musician, being able to work your way around the synthesizer. I think the 2600, for instance, this is a little miniature. Is this the
So
cutest thing?
cute. It's so cute. Love it.
I mean, it's, you can't really see here, but if those of you who are familiar with the the ARP 2600, and then later other companies such as Roland and other companies started doing the same thing about using a block diagram to display signal path, right? And so I think that was another effort to make the ease of use, to make it easy to learn, easy to use, and have something that was ergonomically uh, people oriented. So I think he wanted people oriented synthesizers. I think that was what he really brought to the table. And that is indicative through most of the designs. I'm sure there's a few designs that people will mutter about, no, the membrane switches on the Quadra, but this, every company has has to break out and experiment and see what works and what doesn't. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've really given a nice, sort of broad and long sense of your father's history in music, his approach to things, and, what led us to, like the preservation of his legacy at this point. I'd like to ask a little bit about your own journey in music and creativity, visual, musical, and, how that prepared you for where you are now.
So my musical journey was, of course, integrated with my father, very very much so. From an early age, I had piano lessons. To sometimes I was happy about it, sometimes not so much. But I had piano lessons from probably age 6 or 7 to maybe when I was about 15, I stopped, and then I started again in college. I wanted to learn a little bit more jazz. I wish it could say I am an accomplished musician. I am not. I played in rock bands in my 20s and 30s, a little bit here and there. But I digress. Let me go back. So I was interested in the music that was coming out of the synthesizer that my father made when I was very young. At the same point, I didn't always recognize that some of the songs that I was hearing anyway were made with ARPs. So I think I had no idea that, for instance, Elton John, the whole Yellow Brick Road, that album had ARP 2500 on several tracks. No idea. I just liked it. I didn't know that about most of the music I heard, but some of the music I did know. My father played a lot of Herbie Hancock and Stevie Wonder. I think those were his favorites, actually. So I knew that, and I was really, really excited, especially about Stevie Wonder. I remember it just was just revelatory to know that my dad had worked on the instruments that were being played. And then when I got into rock, oh my God, the Who! I was just over over the moon to know that my dad's work involved rock stars like Pete Townsend, and the whole story, right, about the autograph album.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so I don't have to bore the audience with that one again. But yeah, it was a big influence on my childhood. I had a sense of pride about what my dad did, a sense of belonging in that music world. And then at some point, of course, when you get to be an older teenager, at least during the 70s when I was a teenager, I kind of like, I want to do my own thing. Um, and I thought that I would try to make my own voice heard. And I joined a band playing keyboards. I joined a couple of bands, and I was adequate, kind of punky, garagey kind of stuff. And then that wasn't enough to rebel against. Then I decided I really wanted to rebel and not even play keyboards anymore. And I didn't want to be involved in any band that sounded like a synth band. Even though I secretly liked the music, I was like, it was that kind of young person swagger. So I picked up a hollow body bass and got a tube amp, much to my father's horror. But he was very, very sweet about it. He always was supportive. And I played in some sort of noisy punk bands. But the truth be told is that I pretty much loved all music. I identified a lot with punk, and I really loved the idea of rebelling against the government. I'm rebelling against my dad. I'm rebelling against whatever. What do you got? But I think at some point, I decided that I couldn't do everything. I was playing in bands, but I was not a composer. I was not a writer. So I was, joining bands and playing. But I was doing a lot of art and photography, which was sort of my second love. And I decided that I was going to bring that into my professional focus. So I say in my mid 30s, I decided to not actively perform anymore. That being said, I somehow always found myself involved with music. I mean, I'm married to a drummer. I've done dozens of websites and CD covers and graphic design and photographed musicians and recording artists and this and that, and it's always been there and it always will be. And my my love of music is an integral part of who I am, and I'm sure that is a direct result of my dad. I did also get involved with technology. I took a class in programming, not for the web per se. The World Wide Web was kind of new as far as the general public knowing about it, but just to see if maybe I should work in a computer company, a company that made computers, which got my dad really excited. Actually, I think he'd chip off the old block. And I took a course in C programming, and then I did quite well. I took some aptitude tests and looked like I would be a really good shoe in. And then we were in the middle of a recession, and then it was the late '80s, early '90s, and I found that my knowing how to use a computer was really useful for getting jobs. Where graphic design, it was starting slowly to go into the way of computer generated design, computer graphics. And so I naturally, kind of like my dad, kind of falling in with the industry as it was developing. I fell into the industry of computer graphics as it was developing. I used, before Adobe, there was Aldus, for instance. I used Aldus products. And I had a personal computer when very few people had them. I had one of these little Apple, they're kind of like door stopper boxes. I think they have them in the Museum of Modern Art now. No kidding. They're like this big. They were like Mac Classic, I think they were called. Um, they were always they were always the same prices you'd get for a laptop, but I think they had 4 megs of RAM. Yeah, it just started with a floppy. It was a whole different animal than what you're seeing now. But what was good is I stopped being afraid of technology. I stopped thinking that, oh, I can't do this because I'm a woman. There was a lot of sexism when I was in growing up. Oh, girls can't do math. And this is like drummed down your throat, like, oh, it's okay if you don't do well. So you just have to pass it, because you're never going to use it. And I think back on wow, my life would have been different. I had just been born 5 years later, or what, or something like that. So I spent, a good, until I was about 30, thinking no, but I taught myself almost all I know in computer graphics, and I've been doing it for a living since I'm in my 30s, and I'm in my 60s now. So it manifested itself into an interesting job, and I've done programming. I can do some coding, and I find it very rewarding and very creative in its own way, and it bridged the gap in my mind between the creativity of aesthetics and the creativity of invention, coding, inventing, or whatnot, which is a creative process as well. You are creating an abstraction of thought in one way or the other, and you're making it into something, right?
Well, your story, the story of your father, and all the interconnection just really brings home, the connection between, invention, technology, music, aesthetics, creativity in general, and just, personal experience and discovery. So it's been really wonderful to have you share that with
Well,
us.
thank you.
Yeah. And thank you so much for being on CatSynth TV today with us.
My pleasure, and thank you again. It's an honor to be here.
To find out more, please visit the Alan R. Pearlman Foundation's website and check out the description below this video. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to CatSynth TV.
You are watching Cat Synth TV.